With the collapse of the Silicon Valley Bank, which illustrates the need for some banking regulation, the right, well, they don't like that idea, and they've decided that they were going to, point their fingers at something else. Which would be, of course,
the wokers.
We're going to start with Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who on Fox News said this.
Maria, it appears to me, this bank, they're so concerned with DEI and politics and all kinds of stuff. I think that really diverted from them focusing on their core mission.
Oh, the woke. It's the wokeness. Oh, you see, it's the woke caused them to devolve from the core mission, which is making money. But wait, hold on. How is the not, that doesn't make any sense. That makes no sense. What does wokeness have to do with this? Again, we have a lack of regulation on the banks. Well, that said, of course, Ron DeSantis, he is going to argue the opposite.
I also look at it and say we have such a morass of federal regulations. We have a massive federal bureaucracy, and yet they never seem to be able to be there when we need them to be able to prevent something like this. And so we'll see what they do going into tomorrow, but I think it's just very disappointing. Kind of reminds me of stuff that we saw in the financial crisis or in Bernie Madoff, where you had warning signs, and yet the government, this is supposed to be their job, and they always seem to whiff when it counts.
You see, it's not the lack of regulation. We have too much regulation, and yet somehow, the regulation, they just completely missed it. Wait, no, here's what happened. The Trump administration, along with, again, a bipartisan group of senators, loosened the banking rules. Now, there's 50 Republican senators, 17 of the most corrupt Democratic senators who take money from the banks joined with them. Now, they, of course, because they deregulated the banks were allowed to take more risks. In this case, putting more depositor money into treasury bonds in order to get a return of investment, of course, for the shareholders and executives, which makes them profit. Now, the Federal Reserve then started raising interest rates over fears of inflation, or not fears of inflation that was actually happening. A lot of the inflation, of course, caused by corporate greed. Now, that in rapid increase of interest rates ended up messing up the bond market, and it made it more expensive for companies to borrow money. That slowed down business, it slowed down hiring, which of course experts said would happen. In fact, that was kind of the point, I think, to cool the economy, they said. They even admitted, yes, we want to cool the economy, and one of the results of that, of course, is to have more unemployment, which is to drive down wages. Because they think regular people were making too much money. And we got to put a stop to that. So now look, groceries and gas, they're still pretty expensive. And again, that's because that inflation being caused by corporate greed. A lot of it. Now, in the case of SVB, depositors needed to take out some of their money to do things like payroll. Okay, yes. SVB, however, did not have enough cash on hand because a lot of their money was tied up in those investments. And were exempted from regulations on the mid-sized banks that required them to have a certain amount of money on hand in case something like this happens. Trump signed that into law. The reason the government didn't do anything is because what could they do? They weren't allowed to do anything because the Republicans deregulated it. They caused the issue in the first place by removing banking regulations. So that has nothing to do with overregulation. In fact, that's the opposite, and certainly nothing to do with the
wokers.
It wasn't the wokeness, but that obviously is not stopping the right wing from adopting that. In fact, Senator Mike Lee also posted screenshots on Twitter from SVB's website mocking the bank's diversity policies, along with its environmental, social, and corporate governance policies, saying ESG and DEI certainly didn't save SVB. I assume that that's a typo. Look, those things have, again, nothing to do with the fact that it was mismanaged when it came to investment, short-term gains. The desire for short-term gains, yes, has a lot to do with the collapse of SVB. That said, you have another one. Republican House Oversight Chairman Jim Comer on Sunday told Maria Bartiromo on Fox News, "We see now coming out that they were one of the most woke banks in their quest for the ESG type policy in investing. This could be a trend, and there are consequences for bad Democrat policy." You see what they're doing there? Oh, see what it was is bad Democrat policy on wokeness. See, wokeness causes banks to fail. Did you know that? Go woke, go broke. In fact, here is a couple more. Here's one more statement, actually. This is from Students for Trump, Ryan Fournier, saying Silicon Valley Bank has been operating for 40 years. 3 years ago, they hired their first chief diversity, inclusion, and equity officer. Now they're defunct. Get woke, go broke. It's not the wokeness. Again, that has nothing to do with it. Everything to do with bad investments, poor management, chasing short-term profits, and again, the deregulation that allowed them to not have enough capital, not have enough liquidity, not have enough money in case something like this had happened. It's amazing. They built this, though. Deregulation built this house, and it turns out building a house on deregulation ensures that you have a bad foundation. And of course, in order to deflect from their own failures, because these are the policies that they're pushing, you know, more freedom, less owners regulation in the banks. Well, this is what they get.